The sun dipped below the horizon, casting warm hues across our quiet suburban enclave. There was a calmness in the air, the kind that usually comes with that time of day when families settle into their evening routines. I stood on my porch, letting the whispers of the gentle breeze soothe the remnants of a long day. But tranquility, like peace itself, can be deceptively fragile. It started with small things, petty things, the kind of grievances one might dismiss if it weren't for their cumulative weight. A note, scribbled in an officious hand, taped to our mailbox. "Your lawn exceeds regulation height." It read, though I knew each blade was trimmed to code. Another time. A photograph of our driveway, a tire resting barely over the line demarcating our property from the communal sidewalk. Slipped into our mailbox. The signature at the bottom was unmistakable. Karen, the self-appointed arbiter of our homeowners association. Her vigilance was both notorious and, until recently, of little real consequence. I glanced at my daughter through the window, her silhouette framed by the soft glow of her room. The rhythmic sound of her ventilator was a comforting constant, a reminder of the delicate balance we maintained. It was essential. That machine, life-saving. The thought of anything disrupting its steady hum was unthinkable. But then, life has a way of testing our boundaries. One morning, as I stepped outside, something caught my eye. A note, fluttering beneath a rock by the porch. Her handwriting, unmistakable. Unsightly equipment must be housed within the property. It declared, as if the medical necessity of my daughter's ventilator was a mere eyesore, a blight on this curated neighborhood. Anger simmered, a low flame, licking at my composure. I took a deep breath, willing myself to remain calm. It was in Karen's nature, this need to control, to impose her version of order. But there were limits, and she had crossed one. My instincts told me to confront her, to let the fury pour forth. But I knew better. Rage was a fleeting power. Instead, I gathered the evidence. Every note, every ridiculous complaint, each was a testament to her pettiness, a document of her obsession with the trivial. The neighborhood seemed oblivious to the simmering tension. Life continued in its familiar rhythm. Yet, beneath the surface, I was quietly preparing. There were laws beyond our small community, protections enshrined far above the reach of an overzealous HOA president. If Karen could not see reason in human decency, perhaps she would in legal consequence. For now, I chose to wait. Patience, after all, was its own form of power. I let the days pass, each one a reminder of the strength found in restraint. Karen's actions were a storm I would weather, her notes the raindrops that only served to nourish my resolve. And, as the sun set each day, I found solace in the certainty that justice, though sometimes slow, was inevitable. In the quiet moments, I wondered if Karen understood the gravity of her actions, if she realized that beneath the veneer of her authority lay a vulnerability she could not yet grasp. But for now, these were musings for another time. The night stretched out, peaceful and still, a canvas for the retaliation that would soon come to light. The morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains, casting delicate patterns on the living room floor. It was a fragile kind of peace, the kind that only lingers for a moment before unraveling. I sipped my coffee, letting its warmth unravel the lingering chill of the confrontation with Karen. The clink of the cup against the saucer was a familiar comfort, anchoring me to a semblance of normalcy. But normalcy was a rare commodity these days. The air outside was thick with unspoken tension and whispered judgments. I could feel them. Even through the walls, Karen's presence was a shadow that loomed large over our neighborhood. A perfumed specter flitting from one porch to the next, leaving a trail of discontent. The HOA had become her stage, and she played her part with ruthless flair. The first letter arrived with a sanctimonious flourish. It bore the HOA's crest, but the words were unmistakably hers, a meticulously crafted list of supposed infractions, grass too long, a garden gnome not to her liking, and, most cutting of all, the medical equipment that sustained my daughter's fragile health was deemed an eyesore. It was absurd, a petty vendetta wrapped in bureaucratic rhetoric. I held the letter in my hands, its paper thin and crisp, yet it felt heavy, weighted with the absurdity of it all. My fingers traced the embossed emblem, a mask of authority for what was merely personal spite. The irony was bitter, but not unexpected. Karen had declared war, and she wielded the HOA like a weapon. The citations came fast and unrelenting, each one more trivial than the last. I found myself scrutinizing every corner of our home, searching for the invisible lines Karen dared us not to cross. It was an exercise in futility, a game where the rules shifted beneath our feet, dictated by her whims. And then there were the whispers. Neighbors who once greeted us with warm smiles now cast furtive glances, their gazes sliding away as though to meet mine would be to acknowledge the absurdity of it all. Karen's gossip spread like wildfire, painting us as pariahs in our own neighborhood. It was astonishing how quickly perceptions shifted, like autumn leaves swept away by a capricious wind. I wondered what drove her. This woman with her perfectly manicured lawn and covetous eyes. Was it power she craved? Or simply the thrill of control? Perhaps she saw herself as the last bastion of order in a world she could not otherwise command. But whatever her reasons, she would soon learn that not everything could be bent to her will. The irony, of course, was that her machinations had drawn the attention of a higher power, one that did not bend to her whims. The federal investigation was a quiet storm gathering on the horizon, unnoticed by those too wrapped up in their petty politics and whispered judgments. In the quiet moments, I allowed myself a small smile. It was a smile tempered with resolve, the kind that comes from knowing that justice, though slow, is inexorable. Karen's reign would end, and it would be an ending of her own making. The truth had a way of piercing through the fog of deceit, illuminating the stark contrasts between right and wrong, between power and abuse. I placed the letter aside, its presence no longer a weight on my conscience. Instead, it was a reminder, a catalyst for change that was as inevitable as the dawn. The morning sun had shifted, its light now settling over a small patch of garden where flowers bloomed defiantly against the chill. And there, amidst the chaos, was a quiet strength, unyielding and resolute. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, the scales felt balanced. The absurdity of Karen's crusade was no match for the quiet power of truth. And as the day unfolded, I realized that, though our paths had been fraught with shadows, the light was finally breaking through. I sat in the dim light of my study, surrounded by an empire of evidence, notes sprawled across my desk like an elaborate tapestry, photos, timestamps, and meticulous annotations mapped out the story of an ordinary woman pushed to extraordinary measures. Karen's latest act had crossed a line. She'd tampered with my daughter's medical equipment, crossed from nuisance to malevolence, from petty tyranny to cruelty. Documenting the damage was a ritual, a catharsis. Each photograph I snapped felt like a talisman, a shield against the mounting frustration that threatened to boil over. The oxygen concentrator, vital for my daughter's sleep, lay in disarray, cords snaking uselessly across the floor. It was a silent scream, an assault on innocence. Karen had underestimated me. Her obsession with rules and control masked a vulnerability, a blindness to the power of a patient, methodical mind. I collected her transgressions like a seasoned hunter laying traps, each errant note she posted, every overreaching demand. I archived them with the precision of an archivist, cataloging artifacts of a long-gone era. The air was thick with anticipation, charged with the electric potential of justice. I knew the law was on my side. Federal regulations protected medical equipment, and tampering with it transcended local squabbles. It was a federal crime, a fact Karen, in her narrow-minded fervor, had overlooked. I crafted my counterattack with the same care she used to wield her power, invisible but suffocating. Like a python coiled around its prey, I reached out to the authorities, weaving a narrative not of petty revenge, but of a larger truth. This wasn't just about my family, it was about every family she'd held hostage under her reign of terror. The days passed with a patient, deliberate progression. Each meeting with the authorities, each official report filed, added another layer to the fortress I was building. Meanwhile, Karen strutted through the neighborhood, blissfully unaware of the storm looming on the horizon. Her confidence was a paper-thin facade, easily pierced by the sharp edges of truth. Finally, the call came, a federal representative, their voice steady and dispassionate, informed me that charges were being prepared. It was a moment of quiet triumph. I imagined the look on Karen's face when the weight of her actions bore down upon her. There was a sweet irony in it. The enforcer of rules brought low by rules she thought herself above. The neighborhood watched with bated breath as the agents arrived. Their presence was a stark contrast to the serene suburbia Karen had tried so hard to control. They were the harbingers of accountability, a reminder that justice, though slow, was inexorable. I stood at my window, watching as they knocked on her door. The tension in the air was palpable, a taut string ready to snap. There was a certain poetry in the scene, a balance restored by the very forces she'd manipulated. For a moment, I felt the urge to gloat, to revel in her downfall, but then a quiet voice inside me pulled back. This wasn't about victory. It was about ensuring safety and peace for my daughter, for all of us. As Karen stepped out, flanked by the agents, her face twisted in a mixture of disbelief and indignation, I turned away. The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of red and gold. It was the color of endings and beginnings, of cycles completed. The neighborhood exhaled, a collective sigh of relief as the balance was restored. Inside, I reached for my daughter's hand, her small fingers curling trustingly around mine. We sat in silence, the house settling around us like a gentle embrace. The echoes of Karen's reign faded, replaced by a new narrative, one of resilience and quiet strength. The morning came gently, casting long shadows across the neighborhood, each house a monument to suburban tranquility. But beneath the calm exterior, a storm simmered, fueled by whispers and stolen glances. Our street, usually a tapestry of morning routines, had shifted. Eyes followed me, curious and questioning, as I crossed my driveway. They lingered longer than usual on the medical equipment resting in the sunlight, a silent reminder of the chaos that Karen had brought into our lives. My daughter's ventilator, a lifeline both literal and symbolic, stood resolute in its place. The quiet hum of its machinery was a testament to resilience, defying the reckless tampering of a woman who had overstepped. Its presence was a constant undercurrent to my thoughts, a reminder of the fragility of life entwined with strength. The neighborhood was waking up to the reality of Karen's actions. Conversations were hushed but alive with the tension of knowing. Some neighbors, emboldened by anonymity and intrigue, peered from behind curtains. Others, less discreet, stood in driveways, their discussions punctuated by gestures towards our house. Each interaction was a thread in a tapestry of escalating drama. As I made my way to the mailbox, the air felt dense with anticipation, like the charged sky before a thunderstorm. The papers in my hand rustled anxiously, echoing my own internal disquiet. I could feel the weight of the community's silent scrutiny, a living, breathing thing that wrapped around me with invisible arms. Across the street, Karen's house loomed with an unsettling normalcy. Its facade, immaculate yet hollow, did little to betray the chaos within. Her blinds remained drawn, a deliberate barrier between her and the world she had rattled. The veneer of perfection she worked so hard to maintain had cracked, yet she clung to it with the desperation of a drowning woman. In the ensuing days, tension mounted like a tidal wave. Gathering strength from the undercurrents of gossip and speculation, neighbors began to choose sides in a silent war. Lines drawn in the sand by unseen hands, some offered quiet support, their nods and smiles. Small rebellions against the tyranny of Karen's reign. Others avoided eye contact, fearful of association with the spectacle unfolding on our quiet street. I could feel the shift in the air, a palpable change that spoke of impending resolution. There was an irony in it all. Karen, who thrived on control and order, now faced the chaos of her own making. It was a poetic justice, unfolding with each passing day. The federal charges loomed like a distant storm, their inevitability as certain as the sunrise. It was only a matter of time before the facade crumbled entirely, revealing the truth beneath the glossy exterior. I found myself both fearful and exhilarated by the prospect. In the quiet moments, I reflected on the strange dance of power and vulnerability that defined our existence. Karen had underestimated us, seeing only weakness where there was strength. Her mistake was a costly one, and as the community slowly unraveled her misdeeds, I felt the weight of justice beginning to tip in our favor. That day, as I stood on the threshold of my home, I realized that the neighborhood was more than a collection of houses. It was a living entity, capable of change and resilience, and in the midst of upheaval, I found solace in the knowledge that we were not alone. The stage was set, the actors in place. The final act was ready to unfold, and I felt its approach like the distant rumble of thunder, promising a storm that would cleanse and renew. The moon hung low in the night sky, casting an ethereal glow over our neighborhood. Its silver light spilled over the rooftops, highlighting the lines of manicured hedges and trim lawns that betrayed no hint of the turmoil beneath their surface. My own heart, steady and deliberate, echoed the rhythm of my walk as I made my way down the familiar path to our home, where the real work began. Karen's attack on my daughter's medical equipment had left a scar deeper than any she could have anticipated. The image of her face, twisted with misguided righteousness, had burned itself into my mind. The act had been one of control, a petty attempt to assert dominance in a world she believed should dance to her tune. But she had underestimated the depth of a mother's resolve. In the quiet sanctity of our living room, I gathered the documents with the precision of a surgeon. Each paper was a scalpel, meticulously crafted to cut away at the ignorance and arrogance that had fueled Karen's actions. Federal law was clear, and the weight of it was on my side. The ADA, the Fair Housing Act. These were not just terms in a book. They were shields, forged in the fires of justice, waiting to be wielded. The irony was not lost on me. Karen, so ardent in her belief that rules were the backbone of civilization, had tripped over the very structures she held in esteem. There was a certain beauty in it. Her self-righteousness had been her downfall, a classic tale of hubris and nemesis playing out in the microcosm of suburbia. I reached for my phone, fingers brushing against its smooth surface. There was something almost ceremonial about pressing the numbers, connecting to the voices that would carry our story into the halls of justice. It was time to set the wheels in motion, to turn the quiet rumble of discontent into a full-throated roar. As I spoke, my words were measured, each syllable a step in the dance of restitution. There was no need for dramatics or theatrics. The truth was powerful enough on its own, and as I laid out the facts, the violations, the undeniable breach of laws meant to protect the vulnerable, I could feel the tide beginning to shift. In the days that followed, the neighborhood was a theater of whispered conversations and furtive glances. Karen, once the queen bee in this hive of conformity, now found herself on the outside. The HOA, eager to distance itself from scandal, had turned into a hive of activity. Papers shuffled, meetings called, damage control under full swing. The arrival of the federal investigators was a quiet affair, but their presence was a clarion call for accountability. It was the kind of irony that would have been amusing under different circumstances. Karen, who had always prided herself on being above reproach, was now under the scrutiny of those she had never anticipated. The neighborhood watched, and I felt a shift in the air, a new current of awareness weaving through the fabric of our community, a reminder that actions had consequences, and that even in the quietest, most controlled environments, justice could find a way to bloom. As I stood at the window, watching the winds of change rustling through the trees, I felt a profound sense of calm. My daughter's equipment, once a target of ignorance, now stood untouched, revered, a silent testament to our victory. The battle had been fought, not with fists or fury, but with the steady hand of the law. And in the aftermath, there was silence, a peace, hard won, but fully deserved. The night stretched on, stars twinkling like tiny sentinels in the vast sky, and I knew, as I turned away from the window, that we had written a new chapter in our story, one where justice had emerged from the shadows, casting its light on even the darkest corners of our world. The sun rose over our neighborhood, casting a gold hue over manicured lawns and perfectly trimmed hedges, as if nature was painting over the scars of the past few weeks. I stood by the window, sipping my coffee, absorbing the calm that seemed to stretch its fingers into every corner of our street. It was the kind of calm that heralded change, a new beginning where the air felt lighter, almost breathable again. Karen's assault on our lives and my daughter's medical equipment had left us reeling. But now, with federal charges looming over her, there was a shift. The neighborhood, once her kingdom, was stirring with whispers of rebellion. Karen's reign, built on intimidation and petty rules, was crumbling. Her once loyal followers were scattering like leaves in a brisk autumn breeze, seeking shelter from the storm she had summoned. I watched the mailman pause at our box, his hands moving with practiced ease as he deposited our letters. He had become a reluctant messenger of both doom and redemption in recent days, a carrier pigeon, bringing news of court dates and legal proceedings that promised to restore the balance Karen had upset. As he moved on, I felt a curious blend of dread and satisfaction. Justice was coming, yet it was hard to revel in the downfall of another, even one so deserving. Life, it seemed, was drawn with lines of irony. Karen always preached about the rules, the sanctity of the HOA regulations. She wielded them like a weapon, misusing her authority to strike fear into those she deemed unworthy. And yet, it was the very law she twisted that had turned against her, binding her hands in legal knots she could no longer undo. In the days that followed, the neighborhood began to pulse with life anew. Neighbors gathered on porches, their conversations no longer hushed or secretive. There was laughter, genuine and unguarded, a sweet melody that had been absent for too long. Children played freely, their joy no longer stifled by the threat of Karen's wrath. It was as if the community had been holding its breath and could finally exhale. I found myself drawn to these gatherings, soaking in the camaraderie and solidarity that had emerged from the ruins of Karen's rule. My daughter, relieved and free, joined the other children, her laughter a testament to resilience, her medical equipment, once a target of Karen's malice, now stood proudly, a symbol of our victory. The irony was not lost on me. Karen, who had once dictated the rhythm of our lives, was now sidelined, watching from the shadows as the community she had tried to control thrived without her. Her presence, once so imposing, was now a ghostly whisper, a reminder of what had been and what would never be again. And what? In a rare moment of defiance, she confronted me at the edge of her lawn, her eyes lacking the fire they once held. There were no words, just a silence heavy with unsaid apologies and shattered pride. I met her gaze, holding it steady, unyielding. It was an unspoken acknowledgement of the battle that had been fought and the peace that had been won. As I turned away, The wind carried with it the sound of children's laughter, a gentle reminder that life, in all its unpredictability, has a way of restoring balance. The neighborhood, once a battleground, was now a haven of harmony and unspoken alliances. And in the midst of it all, Karen was but a faded memory. Her power diminished, her influence dissolved. We had reclaimed our lives, and with them, a deeper understanding of community and courage. The past would linger, a quiet shadow, but it would not define us. We were free.